Hello, Internet. It is I, Malik Aaron, and welcome back to my 2020 box office recap. So, in part one, we went through all of the winners in the pre pandemic era, so it's only natural that in part two, we go through all of the losers in the pre pandemic era. Now, I've already said this in part one, I will say it again. The pre pandemic era is basically every movie that managed to come out in January, February, and the first 2 weeks of March. Every other movie that came out after that will not be covered in this video or the previous video. All those movies will be covered in part three, where I go over all the movies that managed to come out during the pandemic. Every movie I mentioned in this video and the previous video came out before the pandemic. Understand? Everybody understand? Great. Because part two is the polar opposite of part one. Part one, we only talked about four movies: 1917, Bad Boys for Life, Sonic the Hedgehog, and The Invisible Man. The loser side is a lot more overwhelming, especially since we're only talking about 2.5 months worth of movies. So, yeah. Hope you're ready, because we're about to dive deep. So, let's get started. And we're starting off 2020 with a bang, if you want to call it that, with The Grudge 2020. The weird thing is, I thought this Grudge movie was a reboot. That's what I thought it was, but apparently it's not. It's a sidequel that happened at the same time as the 2004 movie. I don't know, and I really don't care, because it's on the loser list for a reason. Now, technically, this movie is not a failure, financially speaking. It's not a failure, because it only cost $10 million. It made $49 million. It made like almost 5 times its budget. I can't call that a loss. But it's a bit more to it than just its box office. A bit more to it. Well, first of all, its domestic box office is terrible, because it opened to $11 million, which is weak already. And that was 53.8% of its total gross. More than half of its total gross came from its first 3 days. That is horrific. That is severely front loaded. That shouldn't happen ever, but it did. And usually this happens to horror movies that come out the first week of January. It's a tradition at this point. It really happened with The Devil Inside in 2012. That's an infamous example. That opened quite big with like 33 million, and then it fell off a cliff afterwards. Same thing happened with Texas Chainsaw 3D, Paranormal Activity, Ghost Dimension, what's else? The Bye Bye Man, I guess, in 2017. If anybody even remembers that, I doubt it. But yeah, releasing a horror movie in January, like the first week of January, is usually a death sentence. They know the movie is trash, and they're only relying on dumb teenagers to watch it. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And looking at its box office, at least domestically, I would say it didn't work this time. But that's not all. That's not all. This movie is infamous for getting the F cinema score. For those of you who don't know what cinema score is, it's basically this, I guess you can say, a survey where like a bunch of random audience members basically are asked, like, what do you rate this movie out of the grading system? Like A, B, C, D, F. That's how it works. And usually audiences are very forgiving towards certain movies. Even if they know the movie isn't very good, they can be forgiving. When it comes to horror movies, they're a lot more ruthless. It's rare to see a horror movie get a great cinema score, and usually that horror movie needs to be really freaking good in order to get a high cinema score. This didn't. This got an F. The last movie to get an F before this was Mother in 2017 with Jennifer Lawrence and Darren Aronofsky. And I can understand why that got an F, because it was basically a fever dream Bible allegory, so it was going to piss some people off. But this is just a typical horror movie. There's nothing that controversial about it. So this movie really, really pissed people off to get that F. Because it's not easy getting F. It's very rare. And shockingly, this is not the only F movie you're going to see in this video. Oh no, there's another one that came out the exact same month. Which is, history was made in January. You got two F Cinema Score movies in 1 month. That is a terrible, terrible, terrible thing to happen, but it happened. So, yeah, The Grudge, it's a flop. Nobody liked it. Everyone who watched it hated it. And nobody remembers it, which is definitely for the best. So, yeah, that's enough of The Grudge. Alright, next up, Like a Boss. Oof, this is a... Now, we got our first real flop here. The movie cost $29 million, okay? It only made $26 million worldwide. It made less than its budget. And its budget isn't even that expensive. That is embarrassing. Incredibly embarrassing. Especially since, Tiffany Haddish, she had Girls Trip. That was like her breakthrough performance. And then she had Night School with Kevin Hart. And it looks like she was going places. But then I feel like they kind of overexposed her. She was overexposed too much. Her last big movie was Nobody's Fool. That did pretty weak. So she was already experiencing overexposure. And this just confirms it at this point. Like, that is so low. Especially, for a movie like this, a lot of the female comedies. There have been plenty of successful female comedies the last decade. There was Bridesmaids. There was The Heat. I'm trying to think of what else. Girls Trip, obviously. There's some I'm forgetting. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. One of you will probably list it, but yeah, for a movie like this, it historically it should do well, but it did terrible. I mean, also maybe it's because just comedies, in the movie world, comedies are pretty much dead. So there's that too. R-rated comedies are truly dead. There's no disputing that. Unless, Good Boys is an exception. But yeah. There's not much else to say, but yeah, it's a bomb. It's a bomb. I wasn't really surprised by that, to be honest. Underwater, this didn't shock me at all. This movie's failure didn't shock me one bit. It cost $65 million to make, made $39 million worldwide. Yikes. That's pretty bad. This movie was doomed from its very inception because it's a Fox movie. Well, formerly Fox. It's now 20th Century Studios. I think this was the last Fox movie ever. I think. Yeah, I think it was. So, basically every movie that was made under Fox, because that was brought to Disney because Disney now owns Fox and all the properties. Yeah, all those movies, except Ford v Ferrari, all those movies just bombed. They did not care. They just threw them out there to die, and this is no exception. So yeah, this movie was doomed because of that. It was also doomed because the movie stars Kristen Stewart. Look, she's not a draw. Okay, she's never been a draw. Sure, she had Snow White and the Huntsman and Twilight, but that was nearly a decade ago. Okay, look at the box office for Charlie's Angels 2019. That shows you she is not a draw. And this just is another confirmation of that fact. And the movie didn't have that much marketing behind it. Its reviews were relatively okay for January standards, because the standards in January are so rock bottom. But yeah, this movie didn't stand a chance at all. It had no hope. It had not one chance of success, and it didn't succeed. So yeah, I'm not shocked by Underwater's failure, and also the fact that it was just rotting on the shelf for like a few years after it was done filming. So that's also a humongous red flag. And yeah, that's it for Underwater. Okay, next up, Just Mercy. I may be a tad mean towards this movie. Some of you might think I'm being a bit mean, but I have to call it a loser because, well, one, the movie is obvious Oscar bait. And it didn't even have like a cool gimmick like 1917 with its like one shot gimmick. No, this was like clear Oscar bait. You just take a certain period in history, a certain time period, a certain relevant topic. You make a movie about it. You release it in limited release. You release it in like January or sometimes earlier than that. And it just felt very obvious. Like this is Oscar bait 101 right here. You got established actors. A Dang it, I lost my train of thought. You have established actors like Michael B. Jordan, Jamie Foxx, Brie Larson. All of them, they're all going over a topic that has been discussed. Well, some would say discussed to death last year. But, that's what some other people have said. That's not what I'm saying. Okay, just making that clear. And people just really didn't buy into it like they did say, I don't know, Hidden Figures. That made a lot of money. This didn't. This only cost $25 million and only made 50 million worldwide, which is weak. Weak for a movie like this. So especially with like Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx. I mean, these two have fan bases. Michael B. Jordan, he has Creed, he has Black Panther, and it didn't work. And Jamie Foxx, he has an Oscar for friggin' Ray. He's established. He's been established for years, for decades at this point, and nobody gave a crap about this movie. So, yeah, not much else to say. Okay, now we're going over our first big disaster. Dolittle. Where do I begin with Dolittle? There's so much to talk about. Okay, first things first. Robert Downey Jr. Okay, he was Iron Man for a decade. All right, he made the MCU as big as it was. He also had the Sherlock Holmes movies, the two. I know there's a third one on the way, supposedly, but those were relatively successful. But I've said in some other videos, just because you're in the MCU does not mean you're going to be successful everywhere else you go. All right? Look at Chris Hemsworth. He's prime example of that. And the same thing happened with Robert Downey Jr. Like, this came out like less than a year after Endgame. And spoiler alert for Endgame, that movie's like almost 2 years old. Why am I even saying spoiler alert? You all know what happened. Iron Man died. He sacrificed himself. And it was like such an emotional moment. That was like the moment in that movie. And it didn't help him at all with Dolittle, because the movie cost $175 million, which is insane for January. You expect that for like summer or the holidays, not January. It only made 251 million worldwide, which is a huge disaster. Like, that's the type of loss that you lose like a good $100 million off that, if you do the math. And the way the math works is that you have to divide the box office by half, because half goes to theaters, half goes to studio, and then you subtract that by the budget. And yeah, this movie is deep in the red, and that $175 million, that doesn't include advertising at all. You have to include that, which means the losses are even greater. So yeah, there are many reasons why this failed. One, the January release date. January is usually a death month. Sure, Bad Boys for Life was successful, but not every movie is Bad Boys for Life. Okay, so one, it was in January. Two, it had a stupidly large budget. Three, this movie is one of those movies that was like chopped up in the editing room. It got retitled. It got reshoots to add more humor, aka poop jokes and fart jokes. It's pretty much all they added. Uh, so there's that, and also the movie is just terrible. I haven't seen the movie. I will never willingly watch Dolittle ever. I've heard enough about it. I heard the infamous scene where Robert Downey Jr. has his hand up a dragon's ass and the dragon farts in his face. That scene alone guarantees I will never watch this movie because it will be torture if I try to. So yeah, nobody liked it. It appealed to nobody. The trailers were kind of just there. They didn't generate any excitement. This movie was, delayed and pushed back, and just the whole movie was a mess. And the end result was a bomb, which nobody saw coming. I assure you, nobody could have predicted this movie would have lost a ton of money. I assure you. I'm kidding. Everyone on planet Earth knew this would fail. I definitely knew it would fail. So, yeah. Congratulations, Doolittle. As Big Rigs Over the Road Racing would say, your winner. And by your, I mean you are winner. Yeah. If you don't know what Big Rigs Over the Road Racing is, look it up. It's one of the worst games ever. Has an infamous title screen. It's fantastic. But yeah, Doolittle, you are the loser of 2020. No question about it. Okay, next. Oh boy, we're not talking about Last Full Measure. I didn't talk about that. And honestly, I don't care. The Turning, our second F cinema score. Number 2, which was historic. That has never happened in history until last January. Yeah, The Turning is a generic, terrible January horror movie because January has that reputation of having bad horror movies, and this is no exception at all. Had no real marketing push. Well, kind of did, but nobody cared. Reviews were terrible. Audience reaction was terrible. Box office was terrible. Cost 12 million, made 18 million, so it's automatically a flop. And the only reason why anyone remembers this movie is because it's ending. Because apparently it didn't even have an ending. Like, wow. Yeah, The Turning, it's bad, it's just bad. Let's move on. We have a lot more to go through. All right, last week of January, we have 2 more to talk about for January. First of all, we have Gretel and Hansel. It was the 4th horror movie that month. That month alone, 4. That's too much. That's overkill. That's oversaturation. It doesn't end there. Oh, it does not end there. But yeah, Gretel and Hansel made like five. It was produced for like $5 million. Made 22 million. So technically, it's not a failure, but its gross is very low for horror standards. Its audience reaction wasn't very good either. It didn't get an F, so it's got that going for it. It did not get an F, although I thought it would have. It had barely any marketing push. Nobody cared. It just, and also it came out Super Bowl weekend. That is an automatic death sentence for pretty much any movie. So, yeah, there's not much to say, but it failed. Well, it didn't really fail, but it did very, very weak for January. Not for Yeah, yeah, for January, because January horror movies can do okay. This just didn't. And the rhythm section. I believe this movie broke a record, the type of record you don't want to break. I think it had the lowest opening weekend for like a wide release, like a super wide release. Let me look it up. That way I know I'm sure. I'm using my laptop off screen for this. Uh Rhythm section. Okay, it had the worst wide opening weekend of all time and the biggest drop in theaters. Yikes. Jesus. It cost $50 million. It made $5 million. Good God. That is just atrocious. There are many reasons why this happened. One, I mean, Blake Lively. Look, I loved Blake Lively in The Shallows. I thought that was a good movie. I thought she should have been Captain Marvel, but she's not a reliable draw. Like, you have to put an actor in the right role. You can't just expect them to succeed at everything because they won't. They just won't. Simple as that. Two, again, it's January. Come on now. You all know January has a reputation. Three, it's Super Bowl weekend. Terrible time to release a movie. Four, the reviews weren't very good. And five, the title is kind of confusing because if you look at the title, you'll probably think, oh, this is about like a band or like a musical movie or something. Because when you think of rhythm, you think of music, instruments, and that type of thing. You know what the movie's about? It's about a friggin' woman who sets out her revenge after discovering the plane crash that killed her family was a terrorist attack. Does that sound like rhythm to you? I don't think so. So the title was confusing and it made no real sense. So, I mean, apparently it's based off a book that nobody read because you think some fans would show up if people did read it, but apparently not. But yeah, the rhythm section, undisputed failure in on every level. So yeah, that's it for January. February, we start off with another bang, I guess. Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn. Now, this movie, although a lot of people consider it to be a bust, a flop, it it can say this. It can say this one thing. It was the highest grossing superhero movie to come out in 2020 by default. Because if things went differently, this would have been on the top 5. It would have barely made the top 10. But because 2020 was 2020, Birds of Prey is the winner of the superhero war. So, yay, I guess, for all you Birds of Prey fans, you have that at least. But in every other aspect, this movie's a bust. It cost $82 million and made $201 million. You're probably saying, Malik, it made 2.5 times his budget. How is that bad? Well, this doesn't include marketing, and Warner Brothers is historically ruthless with their marketing. Like, they will put ads everywhere. So they probably spent a pretty penny on marketing. And two, this is a DC movie. I know DC doesn't have the best reputation right now, but their movies typically make a lot more than $200 million. In fact, a lot of them make $200 million domestically, not worldwide. I mean, look at even the bad DCU movies like Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, Suicide Squad, Justice League, all made 3-4 times this. Like, that's terrible. And Suicide Squad's the most important because Birds of Prey is It's a spin-off, but it's kind of a sequel in a weird way. It's a mid. It doesn't matter. Yeah, Suicide Squad, as bad as it made $745 million. This made 201, and both movies starred Harley Quinn. Yeah, that's a humongous dip. And I believe the main reason why this movie just didn't work out, I think it was because of its overly feminist nature. Like, it's very extremely girl power angle, which I think may have turned off some people. It may have just alienated people. Because, look, we can argue about this all day long, but for the most part, most people who watch superhero movies are guys. It's the truth. You look at Wonder Woman's demographic breakdown. The first Wonder Woman, not 1984. The first one. Let me look it up. Somewhere. Ugh, it's hard to look up these audience breakdowns because they're a lot harder than just looking up like legit numbers. Okay. Audience breakdown. Okay, well, blah 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 blah. Okay, that had like 52% of its viewers being women. All right. But that's still almost 50%. But for every other superhero movie, it's mostly male. But this movie, even though it tried so hard to please the female gender in so many ways, having the all female cast, having Ewan McGregor, who played the villain of the movie Black Mask, he said in interviews it's like an overly feminist movie, which I'm pretty sure a lot of people took his words and were just like, no, thanks. I don't like that. Oh, yeah. Audience demographics. Yeah, males made up 54%. Like, how ironic is that? And so you can't blame men for not showing up because technically speaking they did. It's the females who didn't show up. And that was the group they were hoping would show up the most, and they didn't. And it's funny. It's very funny. So yeah, Birds of Prey. Well, it's not getting a sequel. We know that. Margot Robbie pretty much said that. She more or less confirmed it. So yeah, Birds of Prey is definitely in terms of budget, it's definitely the second biggest loser of 2020. I mean, obviously, Doolittle's number one because its budget was twice the size of Birds of Prey, but still, Birds of Prey, big miss, huge miss for 2020, even though it was the highest grossing superhero movie. Okay, Downhill. That's a great title to describe the rest of these movies that we're going to go over. Downhill, not much to say. It doesn't even have a budget. It was probably cheap, but it still made no money. It made like $8 million. It opened on Valentine's Day, which you're like, oh, what's so bad about that? Because Valentine's Day is very lucrative. Well, here's the thing. You have a couple. You have this movie about a couple that might go through a divorce. Who in the blue hell puts a movie about a couple having a divorce on Valentine's Day? That's not right. that goes. That's that's boneheaded. That's a brain dead decision. And surprise, surprise, didn't work. Nobody liked it. Nobody saw it, and that's the end of the story. So yeah, that's Downhill. Next up is Fantasy Island, the movie nobody wanted. Technically speaking, it is a success. It made 7 million. It cost $7 million, made 53 million. Success. Technically speaking, it's a success. But critically, it is not. It is not a success at all. Everyone who watched this movie hated it. They all hated it. And for domestically, it did very weak for horror, because horror in recent years has been so strong box office wise. It's been very strong. But 2020, it was just like, nah, we're not watching any of these, because I guess audiences were being smart. They knew to avoid all of the really bad horror movies. So good on you, audience. You made the right choice. And avoiding this was definitely for the best. So, yeah. And the fact that they took a concept like Fantasy Island and turned it into a generic horror movie, just like, why? Why? I I don't get it. I really don't get it. So next up, The Photograph. This is a romance movie coming out on Valentine's Day. Surely this cannot fail. There is no way this can fail. No possible way. But it did. It really did. It cost 15 million. It made 20 million worldwide. That's terrible. And the thing is, it opened okay-ish. It opened like 12 million. And then after Valentine's Day, the movie fell off a cliff. It fell off a rock. Let me show you its decline. That way you really understand. It fell 77%. Over three-fourths. Over three-fourths. Its second weekend. That's crazy. That's crazy. So yeah, Valentine's Day was the only way this movie would have made any money, and it made an okay amount, but after that, it died. It died real fast. It died like a horror movie. Like a bad horror movie. It died, it had a faster decline than like The Grudge, than what was it? I think we talked about already. What was it? Dang it, I keep forgetting. The Turning. It fell faster than both those movies, and those movies were horrific. this this just fell faster than those. So yeah, I guess it's just proof that just because a romance movie comes out on Valentine's Day doesn't automatically mean it will be successful. Okay, we're almost done. We're getting there. Okay, the Bram's the Boy 2. Why does this exist? Someone please out there, someone please explain to me, why did this need to happen? The first Boy came out in 2016. It did okay-ish. And then you make a sequel 4 years later? Like, who's gonna watch it? How many fans of The Boy are there? Clearly not too many, because this movie did bad, even for horror movie standards. It cost 10 million to make. It made 18 million worldwide. Flop. And the reason why it flopped is very obvious. It's because there were way too many friggin' horror movies coming out one after the other. People were just tired. And because people already knew these movies sucked hard. They were awful. Everyone was waiting for The Invisible Man, because at least that movie looked decent. This didn't. It was a sequel to a movie that wasn't even all that great in the first place, and nobody wanted the sequel, but here it is. It's stupid. So stupid. There is a reason why the thumbnail of my prediction video for this movie just says stop. And the reason why it says stop, because I was sick and tired of talking about horror movies again and again and again and again. It was infuriating. It pissed me off. So, yeah. Bram's the Boy 2 flop. Call the Wild. Okay. Well, actually, this is more of a flop than Birds of Prey, but Birds of Prey is a bigger property, so it's a bit more infamous. But Call of the Wild is a huge bomb. No question. Humongous bomb. Cost 125 million, which is stupid high for a movie like this. I'm pretty sure Harrison Ford really came for that budget, but it only made 107 million worldwide. Made less than its budget. When your budget is that big, it means you're going to lose a whole lot of money. And that budget doesn't even include advertising. Now, the thing is, I thought this movie would do a whole lot worse, at least domestically. I thought it would do just terrible, terrible numbers. But, domestically, it opened okay-ish for the time it came out. It almost beat Sonic the Hedgehog in the second weekend. Like, it was an intense weekend. Probably the most intense weekend of the whole year when it comes to box office results. It almost beat it. So, there's that. But, yeah. Movie's a bust in every way possible. And there are a few reasons for that. One, it's a Fox movie. Well, this was the first 20th Century Studios movie. But it was still Fox. And, yeah, when you're a Fox movie associated with Disney, it only means bad things. And also, one of the things a lot of people noticed about the movie was the CGI dog, Buck. That dog looked so fake. So fake. That it takes you out of the movie. You can't get into it. That's what a lot of people said when they saw the trailer. They just could not get into it because of the CGI dog, the fake CGI dog. It just looked bad. It looked so unconvincing. Now, some would say, oh, it would have been better with a real dog, but I understand why they would use a CGI dog because, most real dogs don't do what Buck does in the movie. Besides, if you use a real dog and you're doing like some stunt, ooh, you're going to have a lot of animal rights groups up your ass. Look what happened to a dog's purpose. Like, yikes. You don't want a PR shit show like that ever. So yeah, that's probably the reason why they made him the dog CGI the whole movie. But yeah, that CGI dog just turned people off. And, the reviews I heard were pretty good. But, I mean, in the video I made about this, I said, for kids, which movie are they going to pick? Are they going to pick one about an old man and a dog? Or are they going to pick the other that's about a talking hedgehog that flosses? Yeah, it's obvious they're going to pick the hedgehog. Like, no shit. So, yeah, that's Call of the Wild. And that's it for February. We're now in March. We have a few movies left. So let's get through them relatively quickly. Onward. Now, it's a little unfair to call this a flop because this movie was screwed when it came out. But even before, the weekend before the pandemic really struck, it opened pretty weak for Pixar standards. Because Pixar, they have a long history of success. If you don't mention Cars 2 or The Good Dinosaur. They have a long history of success. But it's mostly because all their movies usually come out during the summer season. This didn't. This came out in March, which was very odd for Pixar. They never open in March, ever. I know Zootopia opened in March, but that's Disney. This is Pixar. They're different. So that was kind of a weird choice. Also, the fact that the movie didn't look all that interesting. It's obvious, at least before the pandemic struck, it was obvious that Pixar, the two Pixar movies that came out in 2020, Onward and Soul, it's obvious that Pixar saw Soul as more of a priority than Onward. Onward was just a side project. in comparison. And yeah, just I didn't care about it, even though I've loved many Pixar movies. Like a lot of Pixar movies are my favorites, like Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Wall-E, Up, the Toy Story trilogy, all fantastic. And I just didn't care about this at all. So yeah, uh, and yeah, it opened at a very very bad time because literally the weekend after this, the pandemic struck, and boy, oh boy, it fell 73%, which never happens for family movies ever, unless it's like the weekend after Thanksgiving or something. But, like, God, wow. And you could just look at the box office just plummet into oblivion in mere days. It's very, very bad. And so yeah, it's hard. It's kind of hard to call it a flop, but technically speaking, it is. It just is. And it probably lost a ton of money. They won't get that. Disney's not going to get that money back for a long time. So yeah, that's Onward. Then we got The Way Back. It's a Ben Affleck basketball movie. It opened kind of weak, and then COVID killed it, and it only made 14 million worldwide on a budget of 23 million. Again, it's hard to call it a flop because it was in an unfair situation, but it still lost money, so it's a flop, technically speaking. And, I mean, basketball movies, unless they got Michael Jordan and Bugs Bunny, they're not super duper successful, which is weird. You'd think basketball movies would be making shit tons of money because it's basketball, but that's not the case. More people like football and to some extent baseball than basketball. It's really weird. But that's just how it is. That's just how it is. It's very strange. But yeah, not much to say about The Way Back. Then there's Emma. There's this. It had a limited release. It opened meh, and then COVID killed it. Not much to say. It's just it didn't do all that great. We're just rushing through these. And now the final weekend before everything went to hell. Bloodshot The Hunt, I still believe. Bloodshot came out. I saw the trailer, it looked kind of interesting. Then I heard it wasn't very good. Opened to $9 million. It didn't make much after that. It only came out like a few more days until all theaters had to shut down. But yeah, it was put in an unfair situation, but it's still a flop in technical terms. It still is. So yeah, don't expect this to get a sequel. I doubt it'll ever get a sequel. I don't think it will, because few people saw it in the first place. So yeah, that's Bloodshot. Then we have The Hunt, another movie. Well, this movie had a bit more to it. It was supposed to come out in 2019. Then a whole lot of people got mad about it with the trailer. Caused so much of an uproar that it ended up getting canceled completely off the schedule. And then later they rescheduled it to March. And it didn't do a damn thing because it only opened to 5 million. It only made just a tiny bit more money after that before theaters shut down. So was it even worth it releasing it? I don't think so. And they really should have, in hindsight, they should have reconsidered. They probably should just, they would have been better if they just put it on Netflix instead of releasing it theatrically, because oof, the timing was the absolute worst. And it only cost like 18 million and it made 16 million. So again, I'm not going to be super mean to it because it was put in an unfair situation, but it's still a flop. And then I got I Still Believe. Made 9 million opening weekend, and then it died immediately afterwards. So yeah, the same thing here. It's unfair to call it a flop because it was put in such a bad situation, but in all terms, it is a flop. And I guess in normal times, this would have done okay. It would have, because the similar movie, I Can Only Imagine, came out in 2018. That did really, really well. It came out of nowhere. Like, it was like right under like the behemoth that was Black Panther. Black Panther was dominating everything, and then this small movie, I Can Only Imagine, kind of came out of nowhere and did really well. And in normal times, this would have done the same thing, but nope, nope, no, 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 no. And then after that, that's it. That's it for 5 months. And that was it for my box office prediction videos. I had to put it on indefinite hiatus until theaters reopened again. So, yeah, that's it for a long time. But yeah, I know that was a lot. That was a lot to go through. I told you it would be long. But yeah, that's it for the losers in the pre-pandemic era. Of all the movies I mentioned, how many of them did you see? I hope none of you say you saw Dolittle. If you do, I feel really sorry for you. I would not want anyone to go through a movie like that ever. Yeah, so the next video after this, the final video, part 3, we'll be talking about all the movies that came out during the pandemic, starting in August with Unhinged, and then we'll go from there to One Woman 1984 and Christmas Day, and Soul too, Christmas Day. Because we gotta talk about Soul, we gotta talk about Mulan, because those are very infamous for many reasons. So, yeah. Anywho, that's it. That's all. Make sure to subscribe, like this video, leave a comment, turn on notifications, share the whole drill. Want to check out more videos like this? You can check out my previous video. It's part 1, the winners pre-pandemic. You want to check that out? Go right ahead. I also have other playlists. I have box office recaps. I go over the box office results for every month. I did one for January 2020, February 2020, none for March 2020. Then recently I've been doing double recaps, August, September, October, November. I will do one for December and January, but that won't come out till February. Also got the canceled series where I go over all the movies that were supposed to come out in March, like Quiet Place 2 and Mulan, and all the movies that were supposed to come out like in April, May, June, July, and they never came out. They either got delayed forever, went to streaming, or they did come out but nobody saw them. So you want to check out that playlist and that whole saga, go right ahead. I will soon be starting my 2021 prediction videos, probably next week. I think, I'm not entirely sure, but it will start soon. But if you're interested in looking at my box office prediction videos for all the movies I mentioned here, I have my 2020 box office predictions, where it's basically every movie that managed to come out in theaters in 2020. I highly suggest you look at my Dolittle video. That one's just great. It's fantastic. So, yeah. Anywho, that's it. That's all. I am out. Bye.